Welcome to today's webinar, Cities Building Social Value, Social Procurement Strategies and Community Benefit Agreements in Halton and Peel Regions. My name is Natasha Pei. I'm a Community Animator for Vibrant Communities Canada, and I'm here today with Rosemarie Powell, André Lyn, and Leena Sharma. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce everybody to you. So as you can see on the screen there, André is Senior Manager of Community Investment at the United Way of Peel Region and lead for the Community Priorities Fund, which is United Way's largest fund stream. He manages a team of volunteers responsible for reviewing and assessing fund applications from various social service agencies and provides recommendations for the distribution of the United Way Community Fund. André is a social justice advocate committed to poverty reduction. He was the project coordinator of the video documentary Spaces, Places, Uncovering Homelessness in Peel. He is also a member of the Peel Poverty Reduction Strategy Committee, and he collaborates with other anti-poverty groups locally in the GTA and provincially. André was also published in Women's Mental Health, where he contributed to the chapter Women Living in Homelessness. They are almost invisible. Leena, who you'll see in the middle, has served as the Director of Community Engagement with the Halton Poverty Roundtable since 2012, a collective impact movement working to eliminate poverty in Halton. Leena brings a diverse range of experience to this role, having worked for local, national, and international community building organizations over the span of her career. Leena is passionate about facilitating communication and finding understanding between peoples, groups, and organizations who may be at an impasse due to differences in perspective. Leena is proud to call Burlington home and enjoys gastronomic adventures. And then finally, you'll see Rosemarie on the screen. Rosemarie has worked over 20 years in the social services sector, focused on employment, newcomers, women, and youth services. She worked from the grassroots up, leading progressively to more senior management positions. Currently, she's the Executive Director of the Toronto Community Benefit Network, where she helps to negotiate jobs and opportunities into major infrastructure projects for historically disadvantaged communities and equity-seeking groups. Rosemarie is passionate about fighting for social, economic, and environmental justice, and so it's understandable that she took time out of her career to co-found 2 community-based workers' cooperatives with the goal of combining resources of the members to take action on pressing community issues, including climate change. Rosemarie has earned several high-profile awards for her work promoting green change in the priority neighborhood Jane Finch, including the Canadian Urban Institute, the City of Toronto, and from the YMCA of Greater Ontario. So thank you again for joining us today, and welcome, André, Leena, and Rosemarie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Rosemarie, I will, as our moderator for today, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha, for your warm introduction, and to the Tamarack Institute for organizing this very important conversation. The use of community benefits agreements is proving to be a successful process for community, labor, government, industry, and institutions to work together to achieve mutual goals, with equity at its core. And I am grateful to our colleagues, André and Leena, for sharing their knowledge and experience with us as their communities in Halton and Peel undertake their journey. So André and Leena, let's get started. Tell us, what is social procurement and how do community benefits agreements fit with a poverty reduction strategy? What is the potential benefit to communities? For example, why have the Peel and Halton Poverty Reduction Initiatives gotten involved in pursuing social procurement and CBAs? André?
I'll begin, yes. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for joining us on this webinar. So for the Peel Poverty Reduction Strategy Committee, we see community benefits as one mechanism to address or to reduce poverty in our community, in our communities in Peel, and more broadly to address inequalities around income and unemployment. We support community benefits, provide support for the creation of jobs, for training opportunities, supporting social enterprise activities, and other community amenities. We also see community benefit agreements as providing opportunity to engage marginalized populations, equity-seeking groups, including low-income, unemployed, and underemployed individuals, whether they be youth, newcomers, older adults, by providing a range of quality jobs as part of a large infrastructure investment. So that's how we see the Community Benefits Agreement fitting in with our overall poverty reduction strategy. And income and unemployment or employment are two of the big issues that we see in as contributing to poverty in our communities, and we see community benefit agreements as providing opportunity to address those barriers.
Thank you, André. Leena, do you have some thoughts?
Sure. So building on my colleague Andre's comments, the Halton Poverty Roundtable, as the backbone support organization for the Halton Community Benefits Network, just to backtrack, our platform is around livable income. So again, recognizing that income security is one of the strongest pathways that we can work on to move people out of poverty. You'll see that we have 4 key pillars that we're working on right now. And so community benefits and social procurement fit within the scope of our strategy, and that's why we were wanting to pursue it. Also, in our community, in 2015, we invited Colette Murphy from the Atkinson Foundation to come to our community to deliver a keynote on building community wealth through different strategies. And community benefits came up as one of the pillars. And at the time, Ian Troop, who is one of our members at the roundtable, he stood up and he was saying, "I think we did this through the Pan Am Games." So while they didn't have necessarily that language around it, in terms of calling it community benefits, but he talked about how they basically focused their infrastructure and procurement spending to give benefits to social, small, medium, and diverse businesses. So from that 2015 conversation and a recognition that we had someone within our fold who had some experience, we grew to the point where in 2016 we hosted an education session in our community to build awareness across our community. What are community benefits agreements? What is social procurement? And how can this be a poverty elimination strategy? So from that session, we also held a consultation, and what we were looking for is to see, is there appetite in this community to pursue the development of these types of policies? So I should backtrack and just defining, because we define social procurement as basically using an organization or a government or any purchasing processes to just garner larger community benefits. And then community benefits agreements are involved on infrastructure or builds in the community that the government might be involved in or private sector might be involved in. So the idea was to educate on what these are and to build momentum for having our own policies and agreements in Halton. So I'll come back to the 2016, the spring, we had our consultation. The 3 questions we asked were, why is the idea of a social procurement program important to our community? The second one is, what is stopping us from moving ahead? And the third question was, how might we work together to advance the idea of a local social procurement program? And kind of a next additional question to that one was, what would be a good set of next steps? And the resounding feedback that came out of that consultation was that there was an interest to move forward. So we ended up forming last summer a working group around community benefits and social procurement. It's now being called the Halton Community Benefits Network, but initially I think it was the Social Procurement and Community Benefits Agreements Working Group of Halton. It was a really long name, so I'm glad we've evolved. And the timeline you see here really speaks to the journey we've had, and it really has been an organic process of collectively learning and building on success from other communities as well.
Thanks, Leena. So maybe André, you could speak to this. How do we know what the right kind of CBA project is to pursue? What are the parameters that needs to be considered before applying or entering into an agreement? For example, length of time, people involved, capacity, etc.
So in terms of, for us, we have this opportunity where the Huon-Tara LRT is being built in Mississauga and Brampton. So for us, that provided the impetus for us to look at this large infrastructure investment that's going to happen in our community. So I think that's one of the parameters. Is there a large infrastructure project that is taking place in your community? And then to look to see how we can leverage that to benefit the community. And in particular, as I mentioned earlier, that, you know, historically marginalized groups, equity-seeking groups, to see if there are opportunities for them to be engaged in this. So we've had, for us, the impetus to actually pursue a CBA approach was because this LRT project was coming to Peel, and in particular, Mississauga and Brampton. It's going to run from Port Credit in Mississauga through to Gateway Terminal in Brampton. We've also had the benefit of learning from Toronto, in particular you, Rosemarie, through your Community Benefit Framework, which was signed between Metrolinx and the Toronto Community Benefits Network. Added to that, Bill 6, which has been passed, the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act, has also provided parameters for us to use to determine if a CBA approach is going to be effective for what we want to do in terms of employment, training, job opportunities for our community.
Okay, so the opportunity is right. It's here and now. And Leena, how do we create an environment that's conducive to creating CBAs and social procurement policies?
Yes, so in Halton, we didn't have the impetus of an infrastructure build coming or a designated procurement process that kind of we rallied around. We rallied around the concept, and over the last year, so I had kind of 3 points to try to build. If you're in a community where there might not be an immediate project or requirement, but you're looking at seeding this idea, some of the things that worked well for us was we connected with other communities who were engaged in CBAs, community benefits agreements, and social procurement policies. So like André, Toronto Community Benefits Network was integral. One of the first folks I spoke with was Steve Shalhorn. Also, Atkinson Foundation, having the deep knowledge and awareness of practices, they were helpful, and also the City of Toronto, the team there, because with their 2015 poverty reduction strategy, the city's strategy, social procurement program was one of the elements. So learning from folks who are further down the path was definitely helpful. The second thing that has helped to build our effort was at the beginning, when we were wanting to reach out to folks to build, to determine and to build appetite for this idea, we cast the net wide. So we looked at, we use a collective impact approach. So we were as diverse as possible in who we invited to the first meeting, and we always, put forward the message. If there's someone else that you believe who should be a part of this message, bring them to the table. So I think one of the first meetings had almost 30 people. This was before the education event. Then after the education event that we had in the spring of 2016, we ended up with I think a group of about 20 to 22 people. So that has kind of, and there's a diverse representation. We have community organizations, we have people with lived experience of poverty, we have business, we have anchor institutions, we have our funders are also involved, because we were fortunate in that the Atkinson Foundation has funded this effort, as well as the Ontario Trillium Foundation through their collective impact stream. So we were fortunate with the funders being active as well. The third thing is education. We recognize that, and this is a statement that I will make, is that the awareness of what social procurement is and what community benefits agreements are, it was fairly low. So we recognize that providing education that was accessible, momentum around the opportunity. So in fact, one of the first commitments that our newly formed working group made last summer was to include an education component to every meeting that we had, because we recognized we needed to build our own collective language as a group and our own capacity to speak about and to understand what this opportunity was. Because procurement can have a technical component to it in its language, and for folks at the table who are procurement specialists, you know, they have a much stronger understanding of the mechanisms and processes that would need to be changed, as well as a familiarity with the procurement language. So demystifying some of that and really simplifying it and helping people to understand how they could best contribute and move the idea forward was critical. And so one of the things that, for example, we educated on was we had the municipalities develop or deliver a presentation on how to do business with municipalities. So it gave us, as a network, insight into how you know, what is the process, what are the requirements, how are decisions made. And then another session that we did was on collective impact itself. So, you know, the Halton Poverty Roundtable has been around for almost over 5 years now, and of course, collective impact is a very familiar concept to us, but to many of the groups who were at the table for the first time, it was new to them. So, you know, understanding why certain processes were important and giving them an overview of collective impact was helpful. So, and we continue, you know, to provide education. We invited Anchor TO, which is a group of anchor institutions in Toronto who are working on social procurement, to come, you know, one of their staff to come and speak to us to give us some insight. So that's those are kind of, you know, I guess the fourth one I would add is to work from a place that recognizes that change moves at the speed of trust. That if you are using collective impact to convene your network, that recognizing that you need to take time to build that collective awareness, that collective knowledge, and to also understand where each stakeholder is coming from. As the backbone support organization, it's important to appreciate, I guess, the sensitivities, the fears, the apprehensions that may exist with different stakeholders around moving forward, because there is a, you know, there is a potential for, if you don't do this right, for there to be some consequences. So being patient with getting that understanding and ensuring that we're moving at a pace that everybody feels comfortable is critical.
Can I just add something to that, Rosemarie?
Sure.
And I think for us here in Peel, one of the things that made it the right time for us to do it is that we had a community-based groups that's the Peel Poverty Reduction Strategy Committee that was willing to move this forward. They saw it as important to their work around reducing poverty and was willing to move forward with a community benefits agreement framework to explore the possibility of it. And I think, you know, having a community-based group available to do that is important.
Okay, well, thank you. From what I'm hearing from both of you, you're definitely on the right path, and your experience really reflects how our own process started with the Toronto Community Benefits Network. And I absolutely agree that the community really needs to be at the core of this. Community needs to be ready, and we need to build capacity to be able to undertake this journey. You know, we know the life cycle of community benefits agreements. It's fluid. It will probably not be the same for each project, and each stage of the process might take more or less time. For example, we do not expect to see negotiations for any future agreements taking 2 years like it did with the Eglinton Crosstown. We have a great you know, framework and a declaration now for hiring targets, but you know, looking at how we can model that process to reduce the time frame for some of these critical paths during the community benefits process is really important. For the Eglinton Crosstown, our process looked like this, really. So number one, we started by identifying the opportunity. The Crosstown was a significant investment of $5.3 billion of taxpayer funds. The project had a clear start date, and we realized that it would impact 13 underserved neighborhoods. So all of this combined made us confident that this project had great potential to get maximum benefits for the community in terms of jobs and social procurement, neighborhood and environmental improvements. Secondly, we undertook a community engagement process and community capacity building process to build a broad coalition of community and labor and a shared set of values, visions, and goals, basically identifying early what success would look like, way in advance of any negotiations. For us, doing this early helped us to build a trusting relationships with the different stakeholders and the different community and labor groups. And it also helped us to manage expectations as well. Thirdly, and then only then, did we start with negotiating with the project owners and decision makers, all while working with stakeholders to establish the support systems and measurements of success. And finally, we are now in the implementation stage of the Eglinton Crosstown Community Benefits Program, and we're actively monitoring and evaluating, communicating the outcomes of the Community Benefits Program, and basically fine-tuning the model before we start the process all over again. And TCBN, we're very conscious that, you know, this is a really important process. We need to really tailor the model and the information, the experience along the journey, so that we could actually share that with our partners in different communities, you know, in different cities across Ontario and Canada, so that we can, you know, facilitate a more smoother process and raise the floor, so that we can have better and better negotiated agreements for the community. Okay, so want to continue with the conversation with Leena and André. Leena, what's the approach when you're not coming from a place of starting with a community benefits project like with the Eglinton Crosstown or the Hamilton Mississauga LRT, the Huron-Ontario LRT? You know, when you're not thrust into it, what's the approach?
Perfect. So you know, coming back to or building on my previous comments, it was important as a group to co-create a plan around this concept. So what you see here is what our group committed to last summer. So we went through kind of a strategic planning like exercise, and we came up with, you know, this is our focus. We wanted to engage, educate, and accelerate the activation of Halton community stakeholders to explore and implement social procurement policies and community benefit agreements for the purpose of generating significant social impact through procurement and infrastructure spend. And then we had 2 high-level objectives, and then we had some deliverables that we committed ourselves to. So I think this was a really important step for us to narrow our focus and give us something that we could all work on. And all of us have kind of identified where we think we can help on deliverables. So what we've done, you know, we've been fairly successful with number 1, which is a work in progress, so developing a common language and learning modules. We're still working on the modules piece right now. The pilots are still in progress. So what I would say is it's important in the absence of a project that's rallying groups together is that, you know, where there is a potential for a partner or a member to take on and pilot, you know, or to get some market experience in social procurement or community benefits, it's important to give everyone space to determine, you know, where, you know, basically listen to the wisdom of the system. You know, let them decide where could we potentially pilot this, who should be the beneficiary group. So we were very clear that, you know, while there, you know, history shows us from successes in, you know, overseas in Scotland and Australia, across Canada, that there have been different groups, equity-seeking groups who benefited from social procurement and community benefits. We wanted to be open and let folks decide for themselves, you know, who would we like to impact, what makes sense. So we left that open, and we continue to stay in dialogue with our partners who are in a position, so that's usually anchor institutions, to see, you know, where could they have some positive impact. The other thing I would say is that in terms of our deliverables, we have developed a website, and I can speak to that closer to the end. You know, we are working on a branded communication strategy because we recognize that education is one of the biggest barriers in our community to moving forward, not just with the partners at the table, but our wish is to see all of us, you know, building on kind of the Anchor TO pledge that they have, that we're thinking about how can we do a Halton type pledge where we all experiment or take a risk to do some market experience around reallocating our own respective spend in some way to see how we can have greater social benefits.
Thanks, Leena. For André, how do we define success? How do we know when we've reached it?
Okay, and I'm going to back up a wee bit before I answer that specific question. just to share that there is a very specific timeline for the Hurontario LRT to be built, and that was part of what pushed us to really get deeply into community benefits agreements. So for us, we knew that the RFP would be released in July 2017, and so we had to start to engage, have some kind of discussion about the possibility of community benefits agreements. And so we began conversations with key stakeholders, as well as TCBN and Metrolinx, and we have actually come up with a draft framework that we have submitted to Metrolinx for it to be part of the RFP process. In terms of defining success, we also look at what are some of the outcomes that we would want out of this, so that we can make sure that when we talk about success, it's based on something that we had looked at. So for us, jobs, apprenticeships, training, community engagement, critical as some of the outcomes that we want to see as part of this agreement. We want to ensure that we have strong partnerships with key stakeholders in our community. This LRT is being built in 2 cities, Mississauga and Brampton, and so we have to make sure that you know, we are appropriately engaged in both. And so for us, in terms of achieving these outcomes, we needed to set targets. We need to make sure that we can track, monitor, and measure against those targets. We also know, and from the experiences of others, that challenges and issues will arise, and so how are we going to be able to address those? And then what is that working relationship going to be with our key stakeholders as this project unfolds? How are we going to ensure that people can become part of this this journey at different stages of it? And so in terms of what success looks like, we have a couple of things that we have put out there. We have we recognize that this is all new for us. This is new for our community. This is new for many people across Ontario and nationally. So it also presented an opportunity to test new ways of engaging with Brampton and Mississauga residents. How are we going to engage them? Those that are along the line that of the LRT that's going to be built, as well as others that are not necessarily along the line. So how do we engage our community? Setting targets, and you made some comment about that, Rosemarie, and we know, you know, trying to set targets probably not the easiest thing. Will we be able to achieve those targets? So that's something that we're looking at, but we hope that the targets that we set, when we set them, that we'll be able to achieve them. And as I outlined earlier, we have some specific groups that we want to ensure that would benefit from this agreement. So we're talking about newcomers, people that are on Ontario Works or ODSP, racialized individuals and youth, women, you know, other equity-seeking groups. We also recognize that we have to engage at least the 2 municipalities, and we have begun those conversations with both the City of Mississauga and with the City of Brampton. Businesses are going to be affected by the building of the LRT. So how do we engage them, and how do we develop to build off of what Leena has said about social procurement and social enterprises? How do we ensure that those who have social enterprises or would like to start their own social enterprise benefit from this bill? We want to ensure, most definitely, as we outline the outcomes, jobs and apprenticeships, we want to ensure that we are increasing jobs and apprenticeship and training opportunities for our marginalized and equity-seeking groups. because we have tied this to our poverty reduction. And if we're able to achieve this, then we would be able to achieve some progress in reducing poverty in Peel, and in particular in Brampton and Mississauga. We recognize, while we don't have any kind of formal procurement basis right now, but we recognize that there are other opportunities where we can have and support and develop social procurement opportunities, because we have major institutions here in Peel that would be spending substantial money. So our municipalities, our school boards, our hospitals, and others. So, you know, as part of the Community Benefits Agreement framework that we have developed, we have social procurement in addition to social enterprises as a focus. And, you know, we're looking to ensuring that happens. We know that there will be other infrastructure projects that will be taking place throughout Peel, and we want to ensure that this framework that we have developed for the Huron-Ontario line, that it can be used and leveraged for other infrastructure projects that will take place here. And I think, you know, that for me, if we're able to achieve those things, then that's what success would look like. But it's something that we will be working fairly hard on to make sure that it happens.
André, you've given an excellent description of who needs to be engaged in this process. You know, we definitely have to put deep emphasis on the community and all the different stakeholders that we need to bring to the table. Could you expand a little bit more, André and Leena, more about what are some of the pitfalls or solutions to engaging these community groups, businesses, and governments? How do we engage them? Any strategies in particular?
So, if I can just kind of build on kind of the Halton story, what I would add is that using kind of the collective impact approach with, you know, the ingredients, a common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, the continuous communication, and then of course our role as a backbone support. Those ingredients, I find, have been very successful in keeping us together. You know, touch wood, we've had consistency since we formed, and growth in terms of new partners who've come to the table over the course of the year. We did do our best to create an open space for new partners to join as they learned about our work. So I think those are important pieces. And I just kind of say, we would talk, in the beginning, we talked to anyone who would listen, because we never knew who might be able to connect us to another person. So, you know, this process has allowed us to identify champions within different systems, and also to identify a political champion. One of our, you know, Halton Region is a two-tiered municipality. So we have three towns in one city. So the town of Oakville, the town of Milton, the town of Halton Hills, and the city of Burlington, who are all within this catchment. And the mayor of Oakville, Mayor Burton, has emerged as a champion on this initiative. And having a political champion, we understand, is really important to help, you know, kind of pave the path, or to help give us space to have some of this conversation. And another thing that we were able to do is Liz Weaver, actually from Tamarack, and connected us to Sandra Hamilton, and she's a social procurement advisor out west in Canada, who's done some very important work with the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, as well as Vancouver Island municipalities. So we took what I would consider an uncharted path and invited her to our community a few weeks ago to come and meet with some of our partners, because we saw her as an accelerator, as somebody who had developed social procurement policies and frameworks for other municipalities successfully. We thought, you know, giving our community access to her was an investment we should make, because, you know, we believe she would accelerate the process here. And I feel like since we've had her here, we have seen some progress and some greater comfort to move forward. So these are kind of some of the pieces of being nimble and responsive to what's coming, and recognizing it's totally a work in progress even today. The one thing I would also add is having the different stakeholders and working on the dialogue and the conversation over the last year has empowered us now to be responsive to an opportunity that's just come forward in Halton. We've been awarded a courthouse that's supposed to come, I think, into Oakville, and it's a considerable, I think it's a $500 million project. And because we've been seeding these conversations over the last year, it's given us the capacity to be responsive.
Thank you, Leena. That sounds really exciting. And André, do you have anything you wanted to add before I jump to the next question?
Yes, because I build up what Leena said in terms of having that backbone organization, really moving this forward. So we have the Peel Poverty Reduction Strategy Committee as kind of acting as the backbone organization right now, with very strong support from the region of Peel and from United Way of Peel Region. We also have at the table the Peel Halton Workforce Development, and we've been having conversations with Labour, so that, and then to leverage our networks, our respective networks, those of us that are at the table to leverage those networks. So we have our partner agencies that we fund, we have major businesses that are donors to us. So engaging all of that. We have very good relationships with both cities, Mississauga and Brampton, and just leveraging our relationship from at the mayor level through to the various departments that would be involved. And also having at the table and conversations, we've been working very closely with Metrolinx on this, and the Ministry of Advanced Education and Social Development, Infrastructure Ontario, and great support from TCBN. Thank you, Rosemarie. You've been really wonderful in help us navigate this journey. And, just building off of all of those things to help us to be able to move this forward, because it's uncharted territory. It's very new for us and most of us that are involved in it. And, we are learning the lessons as we go. I would also like to mention that there is the Ontario Community Benefits Network, and I've recently joined that network, and it's been a real support to get some of those things moving. And then just having these conversations, I've been having conversations with Leena, and we just sharing and exchanging ideas and knowledge, and that helps us as we move through the process.
Thank you, André. So, that's great. We're at the beginning stages here. We're meeting, we're, forming the coalition. What are could you talk about some practical tools or steps that can help you to move from this initial stages through to implementation?
André, is it okay if I go first?
Sure.
Okay, so what I would add is, I kind of alluded to some of this through our discussion, but doing, at the beginning, a stakeholder analysis of, looking at what other communities have done, who's been at the table. Think about, we kind of identified 4 different buckets of stakeholders. We have anchor institutions, vendors or businesses. We have what we call intermediary organizations or connector organizations. And those are organizations who might play the role between, let's say an anchor institution puts forward a community benefits agreement or an RFP or an RFQ, and let's say they're looking at impacting or opening opportunities for newcomers. So an organization, like a resettlement organization, may play the intermediary or connector role to empower the beneficiary group, who is the 4th kind of bucket of folks that we've identified, to ensure that they're able to, take advantage of the opportunity, to build their capacity to access the opportunity if that's required. So that, that's important, to make sure you have that diversity of stakeholders to have a fulsome conversation about what it would take from beginning to end to see a successful policy or agreement. I'd also, put some thought into your meeting process. Creating a process that's open, having a terms of reference is very helpful. as well as committing to transparent communication throughout the process, just to make sure that people are all feeling included and in a place to be informed and make good decisions.
Thank you. André?
Yeah, so for me, one of the things that, and we're very clear about this, is that our process needs to be inclusive, it needs to be accountable, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be collaborative, and it needs to be accountable. If we're going to engage residents, businesses, we have to be able to share very openly what's happening, what we know, and be able to ensure that we can have people join in whenever they feel that, you know, it's the right time for them. So it's a lot of work. We also know that we have to have more resources working on it. So currently, United Way Peel Region and the Region of Peel itself, there are two of us that's been moving this process forward. We do recognize that we need somebody who is dedicated to this process, not just the two currently. We need somebody that's more dedicated to it, with the backing of resources. We have to develop a work plan, a communication plan, and get that labor market analysis underway. There's some work that has been done already, so we need to just build on that work. But it's important that, because it's so new to our community, to our communities, it is going to require some dedicated approach to it, so requiring staff support and resources to get it going.
Thank you, André. And Leena?
I think André touched on some of the pieces, you know, the importance of inclusive process. Again, because we are the roundtable, the Halton Poverty Roundtable is the convening body. We are going to work in the principles and the space across which we do all of our work. So inclusive, open space, a safe space that everybody feels welcome to participate. You don't have to be an expert. If you have a passion and an interest to move this forward, that is kind of the most important piece. And yeah, I think André touched on everything quite well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So, okay, so we're here now. What are the big questions that you're grappling with? What are your next steps? André, you talked about needing more resources. Are there any other challenges or upcoming issues that you need to think about now?
The resources is important, but we're moving this work forward. So having those conversations with key stakeholders, looking to the municipalities to have conversations to see where they're at with it, because it's coming. It's not something that we're thinking about. It's not a concept for us. It's actually something that's going to be built, and we have a timeline in which to work. So, you know, we're going to move the process forward. We're looking at different funders who could probably contribute to helping us to fund a position. But in the meantime, we have to move this forward.
Thank you, André. Leena, do you have anything to add there?
What I would add is that, you know, because, you know, we are in the space of where it is conceptual at this point, while we, you know, there are some opportunities we have identified or exploring, I think we just work in a vein of, it's not a question, but progress over perfection, that we are, you know, recognizing the different milestones that are moving us forward, that, you know, we are a network, so to leverage the collective wisdom, not to think that any of us in the network has to address a certain issue or question alone. I think one of the benefits that I've really seen is that partners within the network who may not have known each other prior to this, this network now connect with each other, and they have conversations outside of our meetings. And I think that's a good indicator. As the backbone support organization, there's a whole level of I guess what we consider success criteria, that how do we know that what we're doing, the process is contributing positively to the outcome we're looking for. I think that, you know, that's a good place, and just, you know, kind of subscribing to Good Enough Get Going. So you saw that there was our website was launched. There was a slide that spoke to our website. I don't know where it is at this point, but we have, that's the first iteration. We're calling it our 1.0. We felt that we needed to have a website that would help, a good go-to, that if we're having an elevator speech moment with somebody, we can easily direct them to this website and say, look, go and explore. The resources section has a rich gathering of case studies, resources, reports. I just thought back to my experience when we first started building our own awareness. It was very difficult to find everything in one place. So our goal was not only to create a resource for our community, but we're realizing that we're hearing from other communities now who are finding our website and reaching out to us. So, while the focus was our own community, we've been fortunate that hopefully listeners on the call today will explore it, and hopefully it will help you in your own efforts.
And I'd just like to add to that for us, building that awareness about community benefits and the potential that it has to improve the economic and social opportunities in our communities is critical, and that's probably kind of the urgent piece for us, is to build that awareness and to deepen the engagement with our community. We really need to start working with our residents and our business community. So I think that for us is the urgent piece that we need to move forward on. And just looking for additional stakeholders. So we have an initial list of stakeholders, but we want to ensure that we broaden that and keep bringing in others as we move forward on this.
Okay, thank you. That was a really good conversation. Thank you, André and Leena, for sharing your experience so candidly with us. Peel and Halton are in the early stages of the community benefits process, and your communities are coming together to create the change they want to see. Thanks for your leadership. Now, from the overwhelming number of questions we received from participants of this webinar, it's clear to me that community benefits have captured the hearts and minds of some very progressive people. So we have another 10 minutes before this session will close. So we'll move into the question and answer part of our call. We'll start with questions that were submitted in advance of today's broadcast. And while we do this, we encourage you to submit your questions through the question box in your control panel, and we will do our best to get to some of them. So André and Leena, if you'll stay with us some more time, our first question is, what are the legal grounds for community benefits agreements?
Well, I'm not sure about legal grounds, but we know that the province of Ontario, they have passed Bill 6, which provide a legislative framework for us to have this. So, it's going to be part of any major infrastructure projects that's going to take place, whether it's related to health, whether it's related to transportation, roads, any of those things. And I think that's good, because we need that. We need and I know even developers are now seeing the benefit of having community benefits agreements. And at the federal level, we know that there is a Bill C-344 that's being sponsored by one of our own MPs here in Peel, Ramesh Sangha, to ensure that is at the federal level too. So I think, we're seeing the benefits, more communities, governments are seeing the benefits of it. And I think
you were cutting out. I'm sorry about that. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
I was just saying that it provides a basis for us to move this forward.
Oh, thank you. So either André or Leena, we don't have to both answer. What actions can regular folk take to promote and ensure community benefits attached to government, agency, and NGOs procurement at every level? Regular folk.
Sure, I would say educate yourself on on the where there has been success and how it's happened. I think that's the first step, is to educate yourself so you're comfortable, because there is a lot to understand about this, and I think it's dangerous to go off with just half the information. But just to educate yourself and look for champions in your system. I think it's not something you can go and shout from the rooftops right away. I think there should be a process. That look for who might be having conversations around you, whether if it's not in your own community, is there something close by that you can start to plug into and to build, the provincial network in in Ontario that André mentioned has been an amazing support and resource for us in our work. And, that would be a first start that you can say, okay, here's, when you do think about who in your community you'd like to approach, you come with some information. And maybe some of the people you connect with would be happy to come with you to some of these meetings to try and grow your own community's capacity to have these policies and agreements.
And I would just add that maybe also you could connect with your MPs or MPPs to find out if they know about it, because it's important that as Leena says, to educate yourself. So they may have information and refer you to others that are doing this work.
Okay, thank you. Would like to give Natasha some time, about 5 minutes to wrap up. So we have another 2 questions where we can try to get in a few more answers. So either Leena or André, is involving social enterprise a good strategy, or should it just be local businesses we're inviting into the plan?
André, is it okay if I take it?
Sure.
So what I would add, and please pipe in if you have something different to add, is that I think you can identify any beneficiary group. So if that is social enterprises amongst others, I think that's okay. And I think what you need to know is what is the ecosystem of social enterprises in your community. You need to know what that is first. Is there a big enough community that taking that approach would be beneficial, or after kind of figuring out how many there are, if that isn't going to be kind of enough of a higher impact, it may be helpful to start with some other equity-seeking groups or beneficiary groups.
Okay, well, thank you. We have maybe another minute. We can take one last question. And for the other questions, folks, all our organizations presented here today will have lots of information on our websites, at which point you can follow up, and feel free to contact us at any time. We're always willing to share. So last question, someone from the group wanted to hear some stories, especially with relevance to remote rural Aboriginal communities in the near north.
That would be you, Rosemarie.
Okay, well, well, we know that treaties with the Aboriginal people, are really important in helping to ensure that we spread the wealth and stewardship of this great land, and with a requirement to actually consult with Aboriginal people, there has been a practice with what we call the impact benefits agreements, and you can check on the internet for more information about it. But these are similar to community benefits agreements way before we ever considered community benefits here in Ontario. And these are legally binding private contracts between the signatories directly with the Aboriginal community and the builders. And there has at least been over 100 impact benefits agreements signed so far since 1991. So that's an interesting model that we actually looked to when we were developing the Toronto community benefits model. And in terms of the people that we consider as equity-seeking groups and historically disadvantaged groups, we think about women, urban Aboriginals, veterans, youth, and newcomers, racialized people as part of that group. And so it's important that we look at how to incorporate support for our urban Aboriginals living here in Toronto. Thank you very much. Natasha, I am going to pass the mic over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Rosemarie, and André and Leena again for being on the webinar with us today. Leena, I'm so glad you mentioned ecosystems in your last comment. We actually have another webinar coming up where we'll look at systems thinking and ecosystems in communities that I'll get to in just a moment. But Allison, if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to wrap up by saying stay in touch with Vibrant Communities, Cities Reducing Poverty. You can receive the latest thinking, news, tools, and resources from the poverty reduction community by subscribing to our bi-monthly newsletter, Cities Connect. or you can visit the online learning community for poverty reduction practitioners at the URL www.vibrantcanada.ca. So as I just mentioned, if you go to the next slide, we have a few upcoming webinars. This will be our webinar series with Yasmin Nouri. If you enjoyed today's webinar, you might want to follow up with some of these. She'll be a guest lecturer from the end of August to the beginning of September, and we'll explore 3 ways to help community builders design and implement sustainable solutions for the social and environmental problems you're addressing. So in the first webinar, we're looking at how social enterprise as an alternative business structure can help your organization grow sustainably and increase your impact in the community. The second webinar will look at how social impact investing can act as an alternative source of finance to scale your activities in your community. And then, as I mentioned, the third webinar will look at how we can shift our thinking from linear to systems thinking patterns, and then how we can create partnership models in our communities to leverage funding in new ways and drive positive systems change. So if you are interested in any of those webinars, we'll be sending you the link to register for them in the follow-up. And then if you go to the next slide, you can join us in person for Tamarack's 5-day community change event. This is our signature event, and it will be a truly transformational learning experience. We'll bring leading thinkers together with community change makers to explore the critical role of citizens, organizations, and governments in co-creating the future cities. So you'll learn through inspiring keynote speakers, peer discussions, design labs, arts and creativity, community tours, and over 30 workshops, including the release of some new tools. So the themes this year are reconciliation, co-creation, and building together. And again, you can see the registration link at the bottom, but we'll be sending it to you in the follow-up. And so finally, in a few days, you'll receive our follow-up email that will include the link to the audio recording of today's call, as well as the links to learning opportunities that we've just mentioned. You can email me at natasha@tamarackcommunity.ca to provide feedback about our webinar. We're always trying to improve on the experience. So thanks again for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.